はい、こんにちは。116インズです。この3月は WBC の Netflix 公式クリエイターとして WBC 関連の動画を精力的に上げていますが、実は並行してもう一つ大型企画が動いていました。それがですね、なんと我らがシアトルマリナーズのフロントを率いるジェリー・ディポト編成本部長に、イチロー選手の番記者を長年務められた小西慶三さんのご尽力もありまして、お話を伺うことができました。未だに信じられていませんが、お話をしてきましたと。で、今回のテーマはチーム作りの哲学、特に優勝を狙えるチーム作りの哲学について、ディポト編成本部長のお考えなどを語っていただきました。ということで、早速ですね、本編に行きたいと思うんですけれども、まずその前にですね、まずは今オフのマリナーズの動きもですね、振り返っていただきました。
I'd like to start by asking you about the off season. And last year was a really productive year for the Mariners, winning the first division title in 24 years and making a deep run in October. But there were some areas you had to address in the off season with guys like Naylor, Polanco, Gino all hitting free agency, and the bullpen was really heavily used in the postseasons. What were your main goals going into the off season, and how did those additions you made help address those goals?
Well, our first goal was to retain Josh Naylor. One of the biggest, I guess, pieces of our late season push and the playoff success that we had was Josh, and not just what he did on the field, but what he brought to our clubhouse, the intensity, the baseball intelligence, and he performed incredibly well for us. He also has been one of the best hitters in baseball in our ballpark, which is, as you know, it's not the easiest place for an offensive player to exist. And, we were motivated to bring Josh back. Fortunately, he was equally as interested in staying with the Mariners. So, that took care of itself pretty early in our offseason. And, that allowed us to have an offseason. He signed just a few days into free agency. If that would have dragged out and taken us weeks or months even to bring to the dock, we may not have been able to do the other things that we did to make our team better. You mentioned the bullpen. Anytime you play, multiple levels into a postseason or even to a World Series, the bullpen is going to be taxed. And for us last year, that was particularly true of Gabe Spire. Gabe had a wonderful year. Twice in the last 3 years, he's had just outstanding seasons, but he was the only lefty down there for long stretches of time. And, that was one of the things that we had identified going into this offseason. Whether it was watching our opponents, especially when we were playing Detroit and you had, that pocket in the Tigers lineup with Riley Green and Carpenter. And, you get to Toronto and you get some of the lefties that were spread through their lineup, or even looking forward and seeing a team like the Dodgers and, the firepower that they can create from the left side. So adding another lefty to our bullpen was a priority. And, when we looked at the market, we felt like we could take care of most of the business we needed to on the offensive side with bringing back Josh, or even by focusing on free agents. But in the bullpen, we were more inclined to focus on trades, which led us to Jose Ferrer. And then lastly, we just wanted that one more versatile, the extra bat in our lineup. We wanted to bring back Jorge Polanco. We worked really hard to do that, and we fell a little bit short. We also, for multiple years now, have had our heart set on acquiring Brendan Donovan. And if we could do both of those things, we thought that combination of Josh Naylor, Jorge Polanco, Brendan Donovan, and Jose Ferrer would be our perfect offseason. We went 3 for 4, and it was a long offseason and chasing those acquisitions. But I hope that every year we only have 2 or 3 things we need to do to improve our roster, because it means we're pretty good.
Thank you. So Josh signing that really early in the offseason really helps you guys, right?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about, Justin Hollander, our GM, and I, we flew down to Arizona just a little bit before free agency began. We sat down with their family and we talked about the Mariners, because if Josh was with us during what will be the most memorable part of 2025 for the Mariners, clinching games and big playoff wins and big moments. But he only played with us for 3 months. And, when he came to the Mariners, he's been with multiple teams. He didn't know what we were about. He didn't know what our organization focus might be, and how important winning was for us moving forward. And it was a chance for him to ask questions, just like a free agent would. And we went down. We spent about 4 hours together. He asked a lot of questions and really good ones. And I think he was satisfied that this was the place for him. But just as importantly, the very first thing that we said collectively, and this was Josh, it was me and Justin, was we're going to be very aggressive going after this right now. And our hope is that we can take care of this quickly, and not delay, because we do have other things we want to do. But Josh was going to be, the linchpin. He was going to be the key piece to what we were trying to put together. And, if we were not able to do that early, you don't know what the market would have looked like. It tends to dry up pretty quickly if you wait too long. There are a lot of things we should thank Josh for, and I do think that some of the additions, with Brendan Donovan, who does so many good things on a baseball field. I think I cannot imagine acquiring 3 players, and I'm gonna cite Josh Naylor, Brendan Donovan, and Rob Refsnyder, who we picked up. Rob, I guess the offseason started to transpire, and we saw the way our roster was shaping up. We really felt like Rob was a perfect fit as a right-hand hitter versus left-hand pitching, where he's just been awesome. And, for the last 4 years, he's been one of the best hitters in the league versus left-hand pitchers. And having those 3 guys in our clubhouse, the experiences, the baseball IQ, the grit that they play with, it creates a different look to our team. We have stars, and we have personalities, and we have really good players. We have some elite players. I think we have one of the best starting rotations in the world. And but having smart players who can really inspire a team to focus on the little things, to not take a pitch off, to not take an inning off. So often in the big leagues, in a 162 game season, and I can say this from experience, sometimes you'll take a breath when you should be on the gas, and sometimes you'll get on the gas and stay there for too long. So having players like this who have experienced so much and have great leadership skills, it's just huge for our clubhouse. And it doesn't bother me either that all 3 of them have great on base skills and can really hit.
So looking at the moves you made this offseason and the players like the cores the Mariners have right now, the Mariners are really getting closer to that championship window. And from your perspective, what does it kind of take to build a championship caliber organization in today's MLB? And are there any teams in today's MLB that you think kind of represent that kind of organization?
Well, every organization is a little bit different, but I think at the core of it, it's the same. First and foremost, it's player acquisition. Talent matters. I mean, you can't win in this league without talent. But each team does that a little bit differently. You have teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, who have been wildly successful. The Phillies, I would put in that bucket of teams who have been dominant for a lot of years now. It's hard to be any better over any longer a period of time than the current Dodgers or Yankees. They do it. They have huge revenue streams, and they're able to operate in a way that other teams may not be able to. There are teams like the Milwaukee Brewers or Tampa Rays who I admire for what they do. They do it on the other end of the spectrum, which is, it is fairly low payroll. They're super creative. They find value in players that other teams tend to pass on, and they really rely on their own ability to identify young players and develop rosters that way. We're kind of in a perfect place, in my opinion. We're in the middle, and we do a little bit of all those things. And we have been very reliant and focused on player development. So scouting and development is something that we feel is the backbone to any championship roster. We have generated more wins above replacement from our homegrown players than anybody in the league since, I think dating back to 2017. And that's an important element for what we do. And what I think the advantage is for the Mariners, and you see it with Josh Naylor or Julio Rodriguez or Cal Raleigh, when we promote our young players to the big leagues, we have the ability to then, extend and create longer contracts and really open that window. Because as you mentioned, I think we are currently in a championship window. And, in baseball history, usually your championship windows open when your best players are in their mid to late 20s, and you have a smattering of veteran players in their early to mid 30s who are still performing, like prime years. And that's our entire roster. And we also, along the way, managed to build up nice depth and what I think is a really powerful farm system. And that farm system really does contribute to championship window in two ways. One, by promotion, with young players we currently have like Cole Young or Colt Emerson, Cade Anderson, Ryan Sloan, Michael Arroyo come to mind quickly as players who could contribute to this year, next year, and this open championship window. Also players like Jurangelo Sanjay and Ben Williamson and Harry Ford, who contributed by allowing us to go acquire players who we feel like can really push us forward in this window by trade. And it's emotionally difficult to trade players that you raised, but it's part of the game. It's something we've been very aggressive with, and we think that's part of our market niche is, we're in a place in the market where draft and develop and trade are really the key components to what we do. And then free agency is something we do to accentuate our team rather than to build it.
ここまででディポト編成本部長が以前から重視しているドラフト、育成、トレード、中長期的視点も持ちながら運営することの一端が見えたかと思いますが、ここで一つ気になったことが出てきました。ディポト編成本部長は数年前にいわゆる 54% コメント、ポストシーズンを逃した直後の会見にて、歴史的にも10年間で勝率5割4分を残せればワールドシリーズ進出の可能性は高いと話したことでファンの反感を招いたことがありましたが、それは先ほど出てきた中長期的視点、そこが強く反映されていたからこそのコメントでもありました。それくらい中長期的視点をマリナーズフロントは大事にしており、大型トレードで狙う選手たちも複数年保有できる選手が基本でしたと。ただ昨年夏はその傾向から少し外れ、ネイラーやスアレスのようなその年限りで FA となる選手を積極的に補強、意外にも移ったものの補強の回もありまして、ワールドシリーズまであと一歩のところまで来ましたんで、哲学に変化があったのか、そこが気になったので尋ねてみました。
I see it kind of the same way, and I guess I've been here now for 10 years, and I think one of the traits that I have shown, in the years that I've been here, I love inviting the fans in to see what we do, and we have very much been transparent in how we've operated. We kind of tell you what we're going to do, and then we do it. And along the way, I've probably shared a little too much truth, but I guess my thought over time is that if every team in the league, wakes up on opening day and their goal is to win the World Series, that's not a creative goal. It's also not a process-oriented goal. And everything that we've done in my time with the Mariners has been with the intent to create small targets, to allow ourselves to build process and focus on something rather than the outcome, the scoreboard, and if you focus solely on the scoreboard in a 162 game major league season, you ride a lot of waves. The game is a lot of 11-9 and 9-11. If you play 20 game streaks in baseball, you don't go 18-2 very often. And I've been doing this for my entire adult life. I played for a dozen years. I've been doing this for 26 more, and the game requires you to be resilient in those 11-9 and 9-11 stretches. And along the way, you learn to tolerate the back and forth, the mundane, the grind, and the teams that really embrace the grind and find a way to stay above the line. They do the 11-9 more than they do the 9-11. And when you wake up at the end of the day, that usually winds up putting you somewhere in, the 88 to 92 win range if you're a good team. And over the length of time, I think great teams generally hover in that area. And then when their best players are peaking, like we are, Cal Raleigh had an MVP quality season last year. Julio Rodriguez has been one of the best center fielders in baseball. Our starting rotation is in the prime of their career and they're churning, right now. So we just reached our peak. And that's when your 88 to 92 elevates. And we felt like we were waiting at the door of the elevator, and it was time with Josh Naylor and Gino Suarez and, to take short-term chances to help this team, move up a couple of floors. And then, like we've done in the past with Louis Castillo as a great example, we find players that when they get here, it's easy to fall in love with Seattle. Our best, advertising tool or recruiting tool is acquiring a player to come and join us during a postseason push. We've made it twice. We fell short, very short a couple of times. And we didn't want to fall short again. We wanted to make sure that even if it meant we were overdoing it, that we cleared the line and not by a little bit. And it worked. And then Josh decided he wanted to stay, and we'll go back in. And somewhere, my guess is in July of this year, we're going to be talking about who comes next and joins this team to help push us even further.
If you have a big revenue like a Dodgers or Mets, would you have the same kind of philosophy, like 11 to 9 in the kind of cycle?
I think I would, because it happens to them too. And if you look at the standings day after day, year after year, it's there. And I would equate it to playing, if you're playing tennis, sometimes you return the volley and you wait for your opponent to make a mistake. Sometimes you go for the kill. It varies, right now, I think, really by virtue of the moves that we made and what you've seen us do over the course of, I would say, the last 2 seasons. Because, while we went in and did the deals for Josh and Gino Suarez at this past deadline, the deadline before that, it was Randy Arozarena and it was Justin Turner. And we feel like we have been right there at the elevator door, and we are doing our best to take that next step. And last year, in 2024, we made aggressive deals and it still fell short, and in 2025, we made aggressive deals and it got us where we wanted to go. But I don't think, I can't view baseball as something that it's not. In baseball, there are no 1972 Miami Dolphins. There are no 17-0 Tom Brady's. That's not the way baseball works. The best teams in baseball, I think Tommy Lasorda once said, in baseball, you go into every season knowing you're going to win 54, lose 54, and you got to figure out, the difference in a season is what happens in those other 54, and I'd love to win all 54. And that'd make us a 108 win team. And, I think but the mindset of steady, of just coming in every day, don't get too high, don't get too low, and focus on process. Because if you focus on the win in baseball and the only way you find satisfaction is by winning that day's game, you won't succeed. If you find satisfaction in the preparation, in the journey, in the finding a way to get better, whether it's creating a pitch, making a roster move, you will eventually put yourself into a position, I think, as a team where it starts to crest like it did this year. And Nobody wants to win more than I do, but you have to find some way to distract your focus from just the win, because that's not always within your control. But it's within your control to throw strike one. It's within your control to win your 1-1 count. It's within your control to pick up the ground ball and throw it accurately. It's within your control as a hitter to swing at the right pitch. What can you do to create a series of events that are within your control? And and if you do that, you are going to be on the 11-9 side a lot more than well, a lot more often than not. Yeah, this is just you learn the way you learn. I came up in the big leagues as a player with Cleveland in the late 80s and the early 90s. And it was during what I think was their transformation. Well, I know it was their transformation from being truly the worst team in baseball. That was on the verge of being relocated from Cleveland, multiple 105-loss seasons, and a really rough existence for many decades. And I watched the then Indians. I watched Cleveland dig themselves out of that hole in the 90s and put together a sustained run of awesomeness. They dominated a division for over a decade, and they did it the way we are in the process of doing it. They did it by drafting, by developing, by trading for young players, by creative extension, and without running the top payroll in the league. They were a threat every year. They went to a couple of World Series. They came a pitch away, and famously in 1997. The stars on that team, there were Hall of Famers, and they did it this way. And that's you learn by watching, you learn by living, experiencing, and I saw that, and then I watched the Atlanta Braves do the exact same thing at that same time in their existence. And I grew up a New York Mets fan. This is what the Mets did in the 1980s, and it was draft, develop, trade for young players. And then when you saw your opening, just like the Braves did with Fred McGriff, or Greg Maddux, or Cleveland did back in the day with Eddie Murray and Dennis Martinez. It was, for us, that's our Josh Naylor. That's our big move to go and make the next step forward. And Luis Castillo and Josh Naylor and Randy Arozarena, these are significant players, and they make real salaries, and they make us a lot better. And I think they've allowed us. We're one of the handful of best teams in the league, and we have been now for a handful of years. And if the way I think about how we get there is a little bit more subdued or controlled than the way most people think, I don't care. It's as long as we get there, because I focus on the process, and because I know as a player you are so affected by the win every night, the win and the loss. What could I have done better? And as soon as you start questioning in baseball, it steamrolls you. That's how slumps start. You can't stop it. And and really good teams will struggle. And the best place that you can be is somewhere above it all, just somewhere on that small line that exists just above the discomfort, and ride it out as even keeled as you can, because the game is an emotional roller coaster, and you just have to do your best to avoid getting in the front car.
続いて今回お話を伺ったのがちょうど WBC が始まったタイミングでしたので、もしも WBC のロースターを組む場合どういった選手を重視するかも聞いてみました。 WBC は短期決戦として MLB のポストシーズンにも通ずる部分があると感じましたので、そこに向けて何を大事にしているかを聞いてみたかった趣旨ですね。
There's this one, like our team. I think players who understand their roles and are willing to do the little things. And if you have the ability to choose from a pool of players and pick the 30 most talented players, a lot of people have the skill, the knowledge, the awareness to pick the 30 most talented players. But oftentimes the 30 most talented come together and they don't fit, and you have to find players who fit. And, we've made a lot of transactions through the years, if we identify that a player doesn't fit, we tend to move on pretty quickly. And finding players in these types of tournament setups that will allow you versatility. We talk about Brendan Donovan. I'll use like Ernie Clement from Team USA, who we saw too much of last October. Those players are so valuable in these types of tournaments. Relievers who will come in and pitch. I know from scouting many years in Japan. One of a baseball philosophy I brought from Japan was understanding that when you went into a game, you already had a left side of your game ledger and a right side. What you planned on doing in a winning game and how you planned on managing a losing game. And the 11 and the 9, it doesn't mean that in the 6th inning you're going to punt the game, but you have to be able to manage, which pitchers pitch in those situations. Not every pitcher was meant to pitch in the 9th inning with the bases loaded with a 1-run lead. But the pitcher who is able to come in the 6th inning with the bases loaded, nobody out, manage that inning and leave you a chance to win is worth his weight in gold in tournaments like this. Because when it's win or go home, you can't afford to have players in situations that they're not comfortable pitching in. And, an example would be in an average MLB All-Star game, and I'm sure the same is true in the MPB. If you see a top closer pitching in the 4th inning, I promise you that guy's not at his best. It's just not the way that they're wired to pitch.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're performing, but you bring in the guy who's willing to do that thing, to do the dirty work, to take out the trash, and to carry the water for the rest of the team. That's a pretty important thing. And I do think that over time, watching these tournaments play out, I think the first WBC was 2006. The teams who generally have played together a lot, back in those early years, it was Cuba. It's always been Team Japan. Korea has been very good in this tournament format. And I think a lot of it is because those teams played together a ton. I could say the same about the most prominent Latin American countries, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, so many, because they're smaller countries and those players spent a lot of time from youth baseball on up and playing together on the same winter league teams. And there's a togetherness that exists. Whereas, bringing the 30 best players together who just happen to have these skills and throw them on the field and let the best closer pitch the 4th inning, it's almost cold and clinical, and there's no feel of team of we're doing this together. And I think this iteration of the WBC is the best roster construction for the major players, for Japan, Korea, the United States, Dominican, Venezuela, the teams that have historically performed in these tournaments. These are the best constructed rosters that I've seen in this tournament, which means it's going to be pretty fun to watch, especially when it's a little later in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bizzardo he is among the guys that I've ever had on rosters. He might be the most selfless reliever that I can remember, because it's what I did in my playing life. I'm probably more attentive in the way they think, the way they feel, the way they perform in various situations. And I have learned over the course of the last few years to truly appreciate Edward Bizzardo. He is the all-time teammate. He will do whatever you need to do. He will carry the water if you're up by 6, down by 6, if it's the bases loaded and nobody out, and you get the same guy every time. And that's what you're hoping to achieve. And kind of like some of the theme of this conversation, I don't love Bizzardo less because he gave up a homer and we didn't go to the World Series. That's part of it. That's just part of it. And, baseball requires that you get back up off the ground. And, we didn't have a bigger smile than the day we got to spring training than Bizzardo. He's thrown great in the pens, and he's done his work. And my guess is he's going to play a pivotal role in our season again this year. He was so valuable to us last year. And it's a shame that some will only remember that one moment in time. We don't get as far as we did in our season without his performance. And kind of like we talk about the WBC rosters, so often, when you think about the 2025 Mariners 25 years from now, you'll think about the wonderful season that Cal Raleigh had. You'll think about the greatness of Julio. You'll think about, and it's going to be the stars that you gravitate toward. But when you go back and you talk to the guys that actually lived it, they will talk about the contributions that were made by players like Leo Rivas and by Edward Bizzardo. And the same way those 2001 Mariners, the Ichiro Mariners will go back and talk about Mark McLemore, and and they'll bring up middle relievers that you haven't heard about in 2 decades, that were incredible contributors to the greater good. But more often than not, you just talk about the stars, and the game is so much more than the stars. A baseball team requires everyone to contribute. You can't do it in the NBA. If you've got a great big man, you have a chance. If you're in the NFL and you have an elite quarterback, you have a chance. If you're in Major League Baseball and you've got one of the 5 best players in the world and no support, you're not going to make it. Not only do you not have a chance, you're not going to make it. It's required. And it's why there are so many guys littered through history who had magical careers and are in the Hall of Fame that never once played in a World Series or won one, because it requires more than one elite player to do it. And sometimes, like, I'll think back, a great example for many years was Ichi, and he was here. They had a phenomenal team in 2001, and to look back at that team, and that by itself, looking at that team, the stars, the depth, the quality, everybody on that team seemingly had the best year of their career all at the same time. They win 116 games, the winningest team in history. They make Tommy Lasorda seem like he doesn't know what he's talking about. And they didn't get to the World Series. That's how hard it is. And it's why finding something to focus on outside of that win is the premium. And only when Ichi had a chance to go to play for another deeper team and at a different time and place in his career did he get to experience that kind of the ultimate satisfactions. And I look back at Ernie Banks, who was one of the nicest men I ever met in baseball. Never got to experience what a World Series was like. And as I've shared with the guys here, I've been doing this as a player or a scout or an executive for 38 seasons, and I have 1 World Series ring. It's and it sits in a very prominent position on a shelf. I don't wear the ring around. But it's something you experienced and you knew you were a part of, and that's pretty awesome. And I want everybody to be able to experience that multiple times. So build a road or a pathway, a mental structure that allows you to get there step by step.
Jerry, thank you so much for your stories. It was wonderful listening to that. And also, Mariners fans in Japan are incredibly passionate. They are waiting for the World Series to come. And do you have a message for those fans here in Japan?
First of all, thank you. We'll take all the love we can get. When I saw the name of this podcast, it was an easy one for me. Like the 116 wins, it's historic. It's our story. Our next story is being written right now. And the fact that you are behind us, and for all these years we've had the support that we've had, from Japan, is just awesome. And, I have spent a lot of time in my life scouting in Japan, although it seems like a generation ago, but many years of going back and forth for weeks or month, a year. and the people of Japan, the love they have for baseball, the energy that exists in a ballpark. If you can send us that energy, we'll take all we can get.
Jerry, once again, thank you very much today, and best of
Yeah.
luck to you and the Mariners in the upcoming 2026 season.
Thank you guys. Really enjoyed it.
ということで非常にじっくりと今回語っていただいたんですけれども、ディポトさんの哲学の背景などを知るいい機会になったんじゃないのかなと感じています。個人的には結構ディポトさんの経験ですとかそういったところに裏付けされているのが非常に面白くも感じましたし、また元選手として元リリーフ投手としてバザルドの貢献などそういったところもですね非常に楽しく聞かせていただきました。つい私のようなちょっとオタク寄りのファンと言いましょうか、数字ばっかりどうしても見てしまうところが私みたいな人間はあるわけですけれども、ディポト編成本部長はやっぱり野球は人間がやることをよく理解されている、当たり前ですけれどもチームケミストリーですとかそういったところをかなり重視されているなというところも非常に今回お話を聞いていて感じたところです。お話を伺ったのが Zoom でやったんですけれども、意味わからないくらい緊張したんですが、正直英語もかなりたどたどしいところたくさんあったんですけども、ディポト編成本部長本当に丁寧にお話を聞いてくださって、質問に対しても非常に丁寧に答えてくださって、極東のただのファンがやっている YouTube チャンネルでありますけれども、本当にやっていてよかったなと今回感じました。ディポト編成本部長、そして今回つなげてくださった小西さん、本当にありがとうございました。ということで今回の動画は以上としたいと思います。今後ですね、MLBに関する動画を上げてきますので、興味のある方はぜひチャンネル登録していただけると幸いです。それではご視聴ありがとうございました。